forest for the trees. A little bit about me to start with. I am an independent consultant in the agile area. Evolve is my little company. I've worked for startups and giant bureaucracies in, small teams, large teams. I've had responsibility for profit and losses, really the whole gamut. So I have a podcast called the No Nonsense Agile Podcast, which you should all go and subscribe to immediately because it's awesome if I don't say so myself. And Frederick agrees, so there you go. We interview a lot of experts on agile topics. We take a very broad view. Anyway, this is not a pitch for my podcast, but I use lean, agile, continuous delivery, and all those sort of related approaches. I'm also co-author of a book called Agile 2. So let's talk about the problem that I experienced a few years ago when I was a project manager for a very large telco in Australia. I needed, as part of developing a new platform, I needed a whole lot of firewall rule changes made. The company was very locked down and very security conscious. And in order to get changes made, I had to request a firewall rule change from another division company. They discussed it with their IT service management. You can see what I've got here is I've got a sort of a day counter, 1 to 60 here. So this is what happened. I discussed it with IT service management. I had to submit a request. Then they review it, which takes a few days. Potentially, they could have asked me to revise and resubmit, which they didn't. Then they appoint their own project manager. Then he requests a security architect, but he doesn't do that straight away. It takes a few days. Then they think about that. Then they get a security architect, which is already 3 weeks in. Then they analyze and design the application security, which takes 3 weeks. They make some revisions. And then the security architect requests the firewall rule changes for us. So they effectively do a design. Then that's reviewed, potentially revised or rejected. Now, then on day 50, somebody makes a firewall rule change. And then we test it or they test it. And what happens is that we identify problems. It doesn't work. So we request fixes. They think about it, identify the change that needs to be made, and then they fix it. Then we test it and find it still doesn't work. And so we request some more changes. Then they work out what was wrong. They make the change and we test it and it works, right? So I have worked for a company, a digital online products company, and I was able to get that sort of firewall rule change done within 2 days because the team that did it was 4 people and they just sat down the other end of the building for me, and I just went and asked them and they were able to do it. So something that could take 2 days, even fairly complex things, was taking this organization 60 days. And that was an average. So I talked to a lot of other people and 60 days. That's working days. So it's 12 weeks. And recently, when last time I gave this talk, people said to me, we work for a bank. That's quick. So I don't know. It seemed extremely slow to me. So effectively 3 months, which slowed everything down a lot. The same company, by the way, also took 18 months to give you new servers. So
and just to be clear, Mary, the actual touch time or the time spent on fixing the firewall rules was like 15 minutes?
Oh, actually making the change is 15 minutes. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a couple of days of design. But having a look at this here, let me ask you, which parts of this process added value to me and my team as the customer of the process? Where is the value added steps in here? Which parts of value add would anyone like to suggest? All right, well, Frederick?
Well, I was thinking maybe to answer which step did not add value would be easier.
Well, I'm just going to say the only step that was value adding was the one that happened on the last day when they identified the changes that needed to be made. They made them and they worked. Everything else, the other 59 days, added no value to me at all, right? As the manager of this project. And it was a pretty large project. So we had about 100 people working on it. And here's a lean concept you can start to look at. The cost of delay was considerable. It took, that's 12 weeks. So if we didn't know that we had to make this change and then we suddenly had to make it, that would have been 12 weeks for 100 people, which is a big cost. Let's say we can work around it and do other things. There's only 2 weeks delay to 100 people. It's still a really huge cost. So that took 60 days. Now, what was the impact? So there's a direct and an indirect impact. The direct impact is, well, first of all, firewall rule changes smaller companies can do in 1 week with a couple of days effort. Took this telco 60 days time and more than 20 days effort. So the process efficiency is less than 3%. So if there's 2 days real work out of 60 days, then it's 3%. If there's 100 or more changes a month, which there was, that's 22,000 days wasted effort a year, or $22 million at $1,000 a day. I mean, this company had like 30 to 50,000 staff. Won't say exactly.
I'm not sure if you can see the comments, Murray, but there was just a funny comment saying, wow, 3%, that's a dream scenario for me.
Well, I'll give you an opportunity to tell me where that's a dream scenario in a minute. The indirect impact was even greater. So if I have my project team was costing $1 million a month, let's say they delayed by 3 months by a firewall rule change because we didn't expect that we'd have to wait 3 months for it. Assuming that a third of this time can't be recovered, that's, in other words, we only waste 1 month. The other 2 months we use doing something else productive. So we kind of work around it. That's still $1 million waste per change. And again, if everybody's in our situation, 100 changes a month, that's $1.2 billion a year and 1,200 months delay on projects each year. So the cost of delay was enormous. So let me ask you to, including people in the chat, to tell me, is this something you've seen? Does this resonate with you? Gunnar.
Yes, unfortunately, I can see there is a comment. I'm not going to say names, but because of GDPR, but I'm just going to say the comments unless somebody wants to speak up. But I can see for many people, there is a consensus that people are saying, yes, they recognize this indeed.
Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit about how you can, some tools you can use to see this problem a bit better. So all processes are made up of wait time, a value adding process time, non-value adding process time, inspection time, rework time, handover time, and queue time. Okay, so a customer's order's received, you have to wait before production begins. Let's say it's in the factory or whatever. This is a general example. Then there's the time to do the process, the time to inspect it, the time to move it from one place to another, and time just waiting in queues. So there's value added time and non-value added time. And a lot of the time you're just waiting, but even when you're doing work, a lot of that work is not adding any value to the customer. Okay. So that's one way to see the problem. This is just looking at it from a lean point of view. Here's something you can do to map this out yourself. So this is just a general example. So here's a request. It takes half an hour to put in a request. Then there's a wait time of 322 hours before it goes to review and approval. And the approval process takes hours, but out of that, only like 10 minutes is actual value work. Then there's 80 hours of wait before the requirements start, and so on. So you can map out your processes this way, and you can show them to management. And you can end up getting some figures on process efficiency. Notice also that there's some loops, like down here, design review, 20% rejected, repeat one time. So code test, 65% defective, repeat 3 times. That's very common in an outsourcing offshoring scenario. Then test and deploy. Okay, so this is waterfall scenario. And obviously from an agile point of view, we know what the answer to this is. We bring everybody together, and we have, shared responsibility, customer focused outcome. But in the case of this firewall situation, they didn't have that, and therefore their process efficiency was very low. So what do you think? What is the root cause? Let's go back here. What is the root cause of this behavior? Anyone like to suggest? Lack of end-to-end view, wrong incentives. Yep.
I guess you could think of Appendix 7 wastes as well.
Yeah, that comes from Toyota Production Systems, the 7 waste. But yes, those are different types of waste. But what I'm trying to get at is, why does this happen? What is going on? Command and control management. Yep. Leaders not sharing the same goals. Yep. I'm going to suggest that the root cause is bureaucracy. Now, we nearly all work in bureaucracies. If you don't work in a bureaucracy, you're pretty lucky. But in a bureaucracy, there's hierarchy. So that leads to centralized decisions by people far away from the work, and also significant delays in getting decisions made. There's typically a cost reduction focus and a reductionist philosophy. So what happens is the work is decomposed into steps. Each step is centralized in a specialized team. Request and review steps are added. And each team often outsources their work to the lowest cost external service provider, and each team's costs are tightly controlled. So in other words, you take a process that could be done by 1 or 2 people, which is what this company did. They broke it up into a number of different groups, spread the work over about 20 people and about 5 vendors. And then they set up KPIs for each of those little steps and tried to make everybody reduce the cost of their step as much as possible through, service level agreements and contracts, and even with internal teams. So everybody optimized locally, as somebody said there. Now, the theory here, which is very common in management, is that when you do this, it's the best way to reduce the total cost. You reduce the cost of all the parts, and when you add it up, the total time and cost is greatly reduced. Well, it turns out that that is not true at all, because one of the if you're a service provider who is trying to make as much profit as possible by doing some narrow step in a process, the best way to do that is to have as few staff as possible and have them as low skill as possible so that they're cheap. And then when work comes through, you try and push as much work onto the person who's requesting it by making them fill out lots of forms. That makes them, you try and force them to specify everything that they need to do in tremendous detail, so you can just do it, without much thought. And then you set up lots of queues so that your utilization is always 100%. And you deal with all the complaints through a prioritization mechanism, which goes back to the customer. So you make the customer have meetings all the time to prioritize everything. And then you can also reduce your costs by delivering crap to the next person in the process. So you don't want to spend the time to do something good quality. You just want to spend the least amount of time possible. Remember, with the lowest cost skills available. So you deliver something pretty crappy, doesn't work, who cares? That's not your KPI, right? Just do what you were tasked to do, give it to the next person. It's their problem. And if it fails, well, that's good, because that's another job that you get paid for, comes back round through the system again. So when everybody does that, you have this disaster where costs just become much, much higher to do the work. Something that would have taken 2 days now takes, 20 days of effort or more. Something that should have taken 2 days elapsed now takes 60 days elapsed, because of reductionist thinking from management. That's my view on it. Now, this particular company still does this sort of thing to this day, because that's their philosophy. And they do it everywhere to everything. So as I said at the beginning, if I wanted to order some new physical servers and have them stacked and racked and connected and have operating systems installed on them, that took 18 months. Now, my project might not, if I need new hardware for my project, I immediately have this 18-month bottleneck before I can't even do any development. I can't do any agile because I've got no machines to do agile on, because I have to wait 18 months for a dev environment. So of course what happens is everyone cheats. Somebody buys a computer and they stick it under the desk, and that becomes your dev environment, and it has no, it has no security, none of the security controls or minimum automation and so on. So a big part of the problem here is that there are major handoffs between each group in the chain, which management is not thinking about. Management is not thinking about handover costs and times. They're only thinking about local costs and times. So there's engagement, startup costs and delays. You have to wait for resources to become available. You have to wait while they learn what the requirements are. There's heavy documentation typically, because that's part of the process. There's switching costs due to multitasking, because we're trying to keep 100% utilization here. So people are just switching between things all the time. There's often high cost due to over-engineering, because the people who are designing a solution in this process are not thinking about cost at all. They've got no idea about cost. It's not designed to cost. So they just design something gold-plated because, that'll keep them out of trouble if somebody complains later. There's a lot of errors due to lack of knowledge, errors due to poor coordination with other functions, and all of this leads to massive rework, waste, and delays. John Seddon from Vanguard Consulting talks about this a lot. He does a lot of work in the public service, and he says that in public services where people are, requesting things, there's a massive amount of this sort of waste, and there's a massive amount of what he calls failure demand. So if I ring a call center and that call center is unable to solve my problem, then I'm going to ring back. And the worse they do at solving my problem, the more times I'm going to ring back. And so you often find that when a service is outsourced to a private sector service provider, suddenly the number of calls you get to that service skyrockets and the quality of the service falls and the cost rises. And the private sector provider says, see how popular our service is? That's why you now have to pay 3 times as much, because there's 3 times as many calls because people love it. No, the government is paying 3 times as much because the company is taking 3 times as long to solve people's problems and treating each request as a separate incident. It happens all the time with this kind of narrowly focused SLA agreements. If you are hired as a manager for handling failure demand, how motivated are you to make it go away? Well, it's going to depend on your KPIs. So there's a good point made before. This is because hierarchical management is setting narrow KPIs for their managers and giving them bonuses for meeting them and potentially punishing them for achieving them. So you can set up KPIs that are different. So this gets to the solution. So we can use value stream maps to measure the end-to-end process. Like that, that's a value stream map. That is a kind of a very simple value stream map. So we can use value stream maps to measure the end-to-end process from the customer's point of view. And we need to recognize that the whole system is greater than the sum of its parts. So what you can do with management is you can say to them, from the internal customer or external customer's point of view, let's have a look at the process of, I don't know, getting a home loan. Let's say, what is the process of getting a home loan from the customer's point of view? And you can map out all of the steps like we've done. People tend to do it on Post-it notes and cards and stick them up on a corridor. And you do that with a group of people and you say, okay, how long does it take on average, do you think? What's the delay? You map it all out and then you start getting real figures. And when you've done that, you can start to calculate total costs, total time, total effort. And you can show which parts of the total effort are valuable to the customer and which parts are not, which parts are waste. And then you can potentially show or convince managers that with some process improvements, you can reduce the delay and the cost of delay and also the cost of doing the work. So the way we do that is we organize for the work to be done in customer-focused cross-functional teams that have end-to-end process responsibility and decentralized decision authority. And they're self-managing, stable, and continually improving. Which is, guess what? What we talk about all the time in Agile. This is just the Agile philosophy applied to an operational process. Define your process, like that firewall rule 1 was, okay, we have internal customers, they're asking for something. It takes 12 weeks. That's too long. It's costing us a lot of money. So there's your business case, costing us time and money and cost of delay to the project. Get all the people who need to work on this together in one team, set them up in a cellular structure, 10 people or so. Give them responsibility from beginning to end for the process of satisfying the customer with the firewall rule change. Give them decision-making power, and put in place, continual improvement processes like retrospectives and also measures of process time. And that is basically the solution. So we have about 20 minutes left. So I thought maybe we could just open it up and talk about it a bit more. There's There's a few references here, things you can go and read. Somebody already mentioned the Phoenix project. There's also the Unicorn project. So Gene Kim talks about this a lot in, in basically his DevOps philosophy. Mary and Tom Poppendick talk about it a lot in their books on lean software development. We've got an interview with Mary and Tom on our podcast.
It's a really great session.